Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, resources that hopefully help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave. So what's going
Hello.
on there, Dave? What's the latest?
Well, there's one that really hit home for me because it's meant a lot through my lifetime, which is now getting to be pretty long. Daniel Ellsberg's lifetime is going to be pretty short. He's in his 90s. He
Mm-hmm.
has pancreatic cancer. He just did an interview which he said would be his last because
Mm.
he's done. And he left us some words, some of which I think are really important to know and remember. The first thing, which I hadn't heard before, but he's apparently said before, is that when he released Pentagon Papers, the secret history of the US and Vietnam that Robert McNamara had ordered, which were totally secret, he expected to spend the rest of his life in jail.
Mm.
It turned out the New York Times picked it up. The judge decided that the prosecution had violated many of the things and that basic law, including taping his meetings with his psychiatrist and so on, and threw the whole damn thing out. So he's always been out there and he's been active since the 60s.
Mhm. Let's just recap, Dave, for a minute, because all of our listeners aren't quite as old as you and I, and may not understand what the import of that was back in 1971 when Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers, front page of the New York Times. In the height of the Vietnam War, it was raging, and so much debate going on about whether or not the war made sense, why we were there. And when Ellsberg dropped those documents to the New York Times, it was a gangbuster. It was a game changer. I mean, it was the first official peek behind the curtains of what was going on with the Vietnam War. Well, what's your recollection of the impact when it happened, Dave?
Well, it still took another 5 years to end one of the worst mistakes in American life, in
Mm-hmm.
American history. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. It achieved absolutely nothing. It was obvious to people who understood things, including Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, that we were likely to lose. But instead, under the president's orders, we're talking Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, they escalated the bombing, destroyed anything in North Vietnam that could have affected the war. We're talking about things like destroying dams and killing thousands of people downstream, and left most of the world thinking that the United States was an imperial power supplanting Great Britain, perhaps. Now, this is an interview in Politico, or just Google Daniel Ellsberg and go look at news and you'll find it right away. The other thing he said, beside the fact that he thought that when he made the decision to let the American people know what was really going on in Vietnam, he was about 40 then, and he was going to spend the rest of his life in jail, which is a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot.
That was 1971. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Richard Nixon was the president. He had just been reelected.
No, it
No,
was
no, yeah, he was reelected in 72, his first term still.
re-elected in 68. And he was then to be re-elected in 72.
Right. That's right.
And one of the reasons they got rid of Nixon, of course, was Watergate. Something I had totally forgotten. The plumbers who went in and burgled the Democratic headquarters in Watergate and totally
Mm-hmm.
bungled it and got caught and scared some of the people in the White House into telling the truth and saying it was all Nixon's orders. They were first put together because Nixon wanted to get at Daniel Ellsberg. And so we got these ex-CIA agents and their friends who were Cuban to burgle Ellsberg's psychiatrist
Right, I forgot that. That's right.
to get
I
all the
remember
records.
that.
Yeah, These are things in American history they don't teach you in most
Mm-hmm.
high school classes,
Mm-hmm.
but they should.
So now, was that before or after the release of the Pentagon Papers that Nixon sent the burglars after Ellsberg's
That
psychiatric
was
record?
after the release of the Pentagon Papers, but before he sent the same people in to help him win the
Yeah.
1972
Okay.
election
Mm-hmm.
by burglaring the
Mm-hmm.
Democratic National Committee. Uh, most of the people who were involved in releasing the Pentagon Papers have talked on the record, written books, and so on. Everybody, up to including Arthur Sulzberger, the very rich publisher of the New York Times, were very afraid and pretty much convinced they were more likely to go to jail than not because they broke all the secrecy on this.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and of course, it's happened again and again. And something that else we know how important what Snowden told us.
Yeah.
Every time I go looking at international stuff and what the United States policy is, and then I look at what Snowden said the United States policy really was, especially in China, which is something I spent a lot of time studying, I'm horrified. Ellsberg has been talking about the Afghanistan. So what comes, the United States, without a doubt, is not more secretive than the Chinese or the Russians, but is so far from the ideal of democracy that you and I and most people I know want, that it becomes necessary for the Ellsbergs and the Snowdens and a dozen other people who've
Mm-hmm.
been letting us know what's going on. But Ellsberg, in this interview, his last interview, warned people. He said most people who made the decision to let the information out, some of them are facing jail, which Obama had been central in making part of US policy since. Snowden or Assange will probably be arrested if they ever set foot in the United States.
Now, where is Snowden now, Dave? Catch us up on the status of him.
Snowden got out to Hong Kong and from Hong Kong into the Soviet Union, which has given himself citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
A third of the German parliament, maybe almost, I think it was actually almost half, voted to give him asylum in Germany because they knew this was not espionage. This was trying to make America be the democracy that we chose to be. One of the things that came out from Snowden is that we're tapping the Prime Minister of Germany.
We're doing what, Dave? Say it again.
The German Prime Minister
Yeah.
tapping her phones. Our
Oh,
ally.
right. I was Merkel, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so they knew this was information that was not about destroying democracy. This was the information that was about protecting democracy.
Mm-hmm. Protecting democracy. Mm-hmm.
But in the interview, he talks about a lot of examples, like Drake at the CIA, and I can name 2 or 3 others, who decided to say, oh, yes, from 2005 to 2014, the United States government was breaking every law about wiretapping our own citizens.
Mm-hmm.
It was so clear to us at the time when this came out that Senator Barack Obama said that people should go to jail for this. I knew it because the tapping was being done by having AT&T in particular do the tapping and hand it over to the NSA.
Mm-hmm.
And people I knew, Ed Whitaker at SPC and Randall Sanderson, good God, he's been out 5 years and I'm not sure of his
Stevenson. Well, I think it's Stevenson, right?
Stevenson, Randall Stevenson,
Mm-hmm.
very seriously worried about going to jail when Obama got elected,
Mm-hmm.
because they knew they had broken serious laws right and left.
Mm-hmm.
What actually happened? There was an amazing hearing where CEO of AT&T, who at that point was still Ed Whitaker, and his chief lawyer, Jim Ciccone, who I happened to get to know pretty well,
Mm-hmm.
were at a Senate hearing. And the senator asked them, "What did you do?" And he said, quote, "We obeyed the law." And then the senator, who was from, asked him again, "And what was this project we have this memo about from the Secret Services?" And he said, "I obey the law." And then the senator said, "Please answer the question." And he said, "I obey the law," which Jim Ciccone, who was a brilliant lawyer, had told him to say to every question. So he didn't take the fifth.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, the senator from Pennsylvania said, "I believe you are in contempt of Congress," which is a jailable offense. But nothing happened after. But it was absolutely clear that the wiretaps that were done by AT&T and Verizon very heavily were absolutely, totally illegal under every law. And it was what my friend of mine, who happened to, I knew him as a tech guy in broadband, but after 9/11, he got the call to go back to the Secret Service, where he was one of the chief tech guys. And he said, "I can't tell you very much. This is the only thing I can say. All the things we couldn't do before 9/11, now we can do them."
Yeah.
And this was one of the examples.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want to get a profile in courage, Daniel Ellsberg put his life on the line. Julian Assange put his life on his line. Ed Snowden had every reason to think there were people at the CIA who were making plans to assassinate him wherever he was.
Mm-hmm.
And if he hadn't gotten out of Hong Kong to Russia, which gave him asylum ultimately, took 2 years where he was scared. Hong Kong and the Chinese would probably have sent him back.
Mm-hmm. Now, just refresh our memory, Dave. His big disclosure was about the surveillance on the American public, was it not?
That was just one of it.
Okay.
It was also the surveillance on all the officials of our allies in Germany and
okay.
It was also confirming something I happen to know because they happen to be friends of mine. We were surveilling all the top UN people. I remember joking, I was in the office of somebody very senior at the UN in Geneva, and we joked about how I better be careful what I say because I'm sure somebody is listening. He said to me, "You're probably right." And of course, when the Snowden documents came out, it was pretty clear what was going on.
Now, it was Obama that prosecuted Snowden, was it not?
No, Obama should have taken Snowden and given him a Medal of Honor, but he decided not to for political reasons. He decided not to because the military said, "You're not going to do that." And the military and the CIA and the NSA did something like that. All the time I've understood Washington, and I followed it now for 25 years, the president would not go against the military and the CIA and stuff like that. And he didn't. He could have.
Yeah, well, you end up not being a president. You do that.
Well,
just ask JFK.
Highly likely. And the power. I mean, I'm sure the CIA have files that correspond to J. Edgar Hoover's. Do you remember all the stories about J. Edgar Hoover's files and how he used them to blackmail
Yeah, he
everybody.
had files on everybody, everybody in government.
It's
Yes, that's
never
part of
been
how he kept his that was his juice. You know, he had dirt
for
on
40
everybody.
years. For 40 years. And the reason I believe all that's true is the man or one of the 3 or 4 people on the committee who were told to destroy those files actually wrote an op-ed in the Times saying that that is exactly what he did and that he would go to his grave not telling anybody what was in those files.
Wait, which files are we talking about, Dave?
J. Edgar Hoover's files.
Okay, okay.
The Hoover files, when Hoover died, were handed over to a committee.
Mm-hmm.
That committee looked at them, confirmed that the rumors had been true. He had files ready to destroy everybody, not just the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, but half of Congress and the Senate, and probably some presidents,
Mm-hmm.
including Jack Kennedy and his brother Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what our government does.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that the Chinese don't do it too. Although, ironically, at this point, the Chinese is a total surveillance state where anything that seriously opposes the government you will be put down for. They haven't been shooting people by the hundreds since 1989, which was Tiananmen Square, but they sure as heck have been jailing a whole lot of people in Hong Kong and throughout China and in the far west of China, which is the Uyghur territory. Anybody who says we are going to try to change the Chinese government is likely to go to jail. Mm-hmm. That's the nature. Now, in the United States, well, I know a number of people who say we have to change the Chinese government, including distinguished academics at Columbia and Harvard, and they don't go to jail for it.
Yeah, you can say it in this country, just don't try and do it.
And why do we want to do it? Do you remember Herbert Marcuse and Repressive Tolerance?
No.
Very powerful book by a philosopher around 1960. He said, why doesn't the United States put in jail all the people who do things like oppose the war in Vietnam? He said, we would if there was a realistic chance that they would succeed. But we accept them staying out there saying tolerate whatever they're going to say because the system knows it's strong enough that it was not going to be overthrown.
Right. Mm-hmm.
By my friends, some of whom actually did make bombs in the 1960s, although I didn't know it at the time. I have a friend who's still in jail upstate. I knew him in his public persona. In fact, he worked with me as a mover because he had to pay for his wife and baby while he was plotting how to take over the United States and actually start a revolution. And I found out about that when his picture showed up on the front page of the Times. His name is David Woodward, one of the most decent, gentle people you could know. But when we looked at what the United States was doing, this was the time of the Vietnam. All of us had lived through the civil rights battles. All of us had lived through the assassination of Martin Luther King and so many others. I didn't make the decision to throw bombs, but I had friends who did, and I could understand why they did.
Mm-hmm.
What we were doing was wrong, period. I didn't, in fact, the main reason, well, I look back at my psychology, and is this too personal? No, it's good to be personal on the radio.
No, I mean we're talking about risk taking, and we open talking about Ellsberg and the risk that he took and got away with it, and now we're just looking at some other risk assessments that a whole bunch of us did growing up in that same era. So go ahead.
I made the decision that violence was going to be a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that may have been because I was scared of the consequences. That's why I say it's very personal and psychological.
Mhm.
We only have 2 or 3 minutes around the break. Let me go to a personal story that didn't make it in the last week. Why was I sure that social media for 12 years olds and 15-year-olds could be enormously damaging? When I was 12 and 13 years old, I was desperately depressed.
That's really what, Dave?
I was desperately depressed.
Oh,
And
depressed. Okay. Mhm.
the the mean girl who ran the school I was in 8th grade, decided to come after me. Oh, were there rumors and stories and jokes going around?
Hmm.
Oh, and I was fat, so it was really easy to use that to knock me down.
Mhm.
And I was smart enough to intimidate some people, but not smart enough to know that it wasn't right for me to intimidate the same people.
Mhm.
I would do things like use all the vocabulary words that they were teaching us in 8th grade
Mhm.
in ordinary conversation. And I didn't curse in public. In 9th grade, I realized how to change it, included cursing in public all the time and becoming one of the guys.
Figure
But
that out, huh?
it was hellacious. And this was a fancy little, well, not so fancy, little private school. Uh, but it was hellacious for me in 8th grade. And so when they turn around and say, as you said on the air, that the social networks are a great way for people to connect who don't have a base of people like themselves, including those whose sexuality is different.
Mhm.
Absolutely true. But I also understood how the bullying and the destruction that is happening to other people, which has, in fact, clearly led to suicides, is very serious. And why I respect the Surgeon General for turning and putting out that report you talked about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because, frankly, there is a problem. Somebody in the Wall Street Journal said we shouldn't let anybody under, just yesterday, said we shouldn't let anybody under 18 on social networking because it's too dangerous. I don't know if that's the right solution, but it sure as heck is dangerous for some people. Some of
Yeah.
them think themselves.
And there certainly should be much more vigilant monitoring by parents. I think many parents are oblivious to what's going on social media. They don't have a clue. The kids are off doing their thing, and parents are doing their thing, and the social media connection. There is no social media connection between parents and kids.
It
So
was different in my day. My parents knew what I was doing because I
yeah,
put it in front of their face.
yeah.
I was rebellious.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody who wasn't strong enough to stand up to their own parents, and that's most people,
Mm-hmm.
it was often didn't know.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway, we need to take a
when we
break.
were growing up, David, you couldn't hide it. I mean, yeah, I mean, you can maybe pretend, but if you were doing the wrong thing, if you were associating with the wrong folks, if stuff was going awry, your parents could see it. But
Not
today,
always.
well, I say
Not
that the
always.
chances are much slimmer today, given all the activity that happens on social media, that parents have very little visibility into.
Let me tell you a different story about parents back then. We're talking 1970. I got this apartment I'm living in now, which fortunately, being rent stabilized, has allowed me to have a decent apartment since I was 20 years old.
Hmm.
Lynn Garibaldi had the apartment and decided she had to move out. Why? Because she wanted to get her daughter into a better high school.
Mm-hmm.
Moved up to Riverdale. 3 or 4 years later, yeah, at this point I can tell her name. She may not even be with us anymore. We're talking 50 years ago. Gail Handler worked with me. Her mother got her job at the medical clinic I worked on. Gail Handler was in the same Riverdale school and also knew Garibaldi's daughter. Gail put me in a real bind. I was managing part of a medical clinic at that time. I was about 20. I was pretty precocious, blah, 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 blah. And the clinic was going broke, so everybody was quitting, and I wound up actually running the place. Gail was skin popping heroin. That's what she told me. She might have been doing even more. She was also stealing needles out of the closet. And I had to decide whether I should put in strong controls to make it impossible or impractical for her to steal needles, or say, at least she's getting clean needles, so she's not going to kill herself. It was a very hard decision to make at the time.
So what'd you do?
And this is the best friend of the girl whose mother moved out of here because she thought in Riverdale there weren't going to be any drugs.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and yeah, this is much too personal for the way some people think the radio is supposed to be. But frankly, I think that's exactly the radio should be. Doing whatever we can to bring the truth home to people.
Yeah.
We can do it.
Make it real. Make it real.
We need to take a break. When we come back, I've got a lot of stories about artificial intelligence.
Okay. AI, the topic of the day, if not the millennium. You're listening to Community Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day. It's a new life for me, yeah. It's a new dawn, it's a new day. It's a new life for me. Woo, woo, woo. And I'm feeling good. Fish in the sea, you know how I feel. River running free, you know how I feel. Blossom on the tree, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, and I'm feeling good. Dragonfly out in the sun, you know what I mean, don't you know? Butterflies all having fun, you know what I mean. Sleep in peace when day is done, that's what I mean. And this old world is a new world, and a bold world for me. Yeah, yeah. Stars, when you shine, you know how I feel. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel. Oh, freedom is mine, and I know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me.
Okay, we're back. Community Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Before the break, Dave, you had mentioned something about some additional medical breakthroughs that AI is helping to make happen. Can you fill us in a little bit on that?
The first half of the show, we talked about an interview that Dan Ellsberg, who released Pentagon Papers, did. He said, it's going to be my last interview. I'm dying of prostate cancer. And he said some very dramatic things about how now more than ever, we need whistleblowers like what he did, because there's still many things our government is doing that should be exposed so that they might be changed. And Dan made that decision. It wasn't an easy decision in 1970. He thought he was going to spend the rest of his life in jail. It's been a long life since then. He's in his 90s now. The prostate cancer, which has killed two friends of mine, three friends of mine, two of whom were halfway famous, has been inevitably considered totally deadly. That's why it's remarkable.
Yes, excuse me. I think it's pancreatic cancer that Ellsberg.
Did I say? I misspoke?
Yeah.
You see, I'm getting old, and I make mistakes. My memory goes. I don't think I have Alzheimer's, but we'll get there in a moment. Mm-hmm. It's only a few years worth of data, but it cut the death rate from pancreatic cancer in half.
In half?
In half.
Wow.
Particular kind, and so on. We saw dramatical results with the vaccine for melanoma. The one that's really in my one is when I saw the number since Lyndon Johnson declared the war on cancer until about 15 years ago. Half the women who got breast cancer continued to die. It's now down to 80% survive. It's now 80% are survive.
80% survive.
Enormous improvements in medicine. And that's why I wanted to make a point of bringing it to this show, because not everybody's going to pick it up in the New England Journal. Not everybody's going to know how to get the treatments as they're coming. So some practical advice. If you have a serious medical condition, get yourself a doctor who's clued in. That might have been Iris Davis, who was working in a little clinic in Brooklyn when I went out to meet her, giving extraordinary AIDS care in 1987 at the heart of the academic. But unless you know an Iris Davis or have reason to think your doctor is really up on things, get yourself to somebody who's tied in to one of the major hospitals or major medical centers, because they're far more likely to know what's going on. Mm-hmm. Now, I said prostate cancer instead of pancreatic cancer a few minutes ago. Well, I'm getting older. I make some mistakes like that. Hopefully it's not too serious. But it could be early Alzheimer's. And that's one where there's also remarkable progress. It's actually getting drugs approved through the FDA. The latest number is that a particular class of drugs, monoclonal antibodies, can slow the progress of Alzheimer's disease by 35%. Small studies, very preliminary, brand new. But if in fact I have Alzheimer's, I'd want to know that I was getting the best drug. And I've got the right doctors. I go to Mount Sinai, one of the best hospitals in the world, and I have a neurologist there who's been taking good care of me. One of the reasons I'm not freaking out so much is he gives me honest answers. You should find that. The other thing that I'm struggling with, I've struggled with all my life, is serious clinical depression. I've learned to cope with it. I'll get withdrawn for 2 or 3 days now, but I know I'm going to come out of it and just have to ride it out. Don't get as much done as I want to. I do get withdrawn. I'm coping. I'm on Prozac and Wellbutrin. They help a little bit. I want to be on ketamine. Did you notice what ketamine, the information on ketamine?
No, I'm not familiar with that drug.
Yes, ketamine. You are. You think it's called Special K. Because everybody in the club is taking it for a long time. Because it turns out Yeah, it was some kind of horse tranquilizer or horse anesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And it was used by veterinarians, not much by human doctors, except in anesthesiology, where it was a standard drug.
Okay.
Well, the latest word is that a good sized study, 800 people, blinded, random, well done, found that it works really well. It works significantly well against depression.
Mm-hmm.
Depression that's not being successfully treated by today's drugs. It's just starting to become standard psychiatric practice because it is a drug used by anesthesiologists, which means any doctor can recommend it. Watch out for the quacks on this one.
Mm-hmm.
The non-medical people who are setting up wellness clinics, finding a doctor to sign off on the prescription and giving you ketamine while you listen to nice music. Some of them may be doing right by their patients, some of them aren't. It's definitely working well enough as is psilocybin, a psychedelic, that if you have depression, you want to get to a creative, well-connected psychiatrist, just as I'm trying to do now. And I think I've got the right guy at Mount Sinai to help me with that. Again, I bring us to the advances in medicine, not because I can really explain or understand them all, but because I can understand enough to see there are major advances happening and know that most people, including most people in the community served by WHCR, are not getting the best latest treatments.
Mm-hmm.
Stu, you've been in the community a long time. What does it take to find a good doctor and make sure you get treated well? You just walk into Harlem Hospital or the local Medicaid clinic?
It's difficult, Dave. I mean, so often you just get shunted over to whoever's on call and no special focus. I think something you said earlier is important. That if you can get associated with a hospital that's associated with a teaching university, I think you got a good chance of being closer to the research, the state of the art research, the latest stuff that's going on. I know just from my own personal experience that my doctor goes out and he goes to all the latest symposiums and medical conventions around the world to stay on top of what's going on. And he brings that stuff back, and you have access to all the latest potential treatments. As you were saying earlier, Dave, you don't. Sometimes these treatments are experimental, or they haven't been totally tested. But depending on how serious and critical your condition diagnosis is, it may be something worth taking a leap on. So I would encourage folks to find hospitals and physicians that are associated with universities, major universities. And here in New York City, I mean, they're all over the place, from Mount Sinai to Columbia Presbyterian. I mean, there's so many. NYU. So
let's slow people down because that's our area, and I happen to know in Manhattan, Mount Sinai, Columbia Presbyterian, and NYU Langone are continually rated among the top 10 hospitals in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
You can go into the clinic there or just make an appointment with one of the attendings, which is even better. But if you're not comfortable, go into the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
They all take Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
They will all see you if you do not have money, because that's what the best hospital in New York do.
And let me also mention MSK, Memorial Sloan Kettering, for cancer treatment. State of the art.
It's one of the 3 finest hospitals in the world if you have cancer.
Yep.
I brought my mother there when she had lung cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But I also remember visiting on Dr. Iris Davis, who was at a local clinic, heart of Brooklyn, heart of the AIDS epidemic. And I was out there interviewing her for the radio. I had met her because she testified before the Surgeon General's AIDS Commission, which I covered. And I invited myself out to meet her and spend a day with her. 3 strong Black women who were killing themselves to take good care of their patients in that little clinic in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily, I don't think Iris had any major medical association at that point in her life. She told me she graduated #1 in her class at the University of Virginia Medical School.
Mm-hmm.
And she went back to the community. So it's not only the hospitals, but if you don't know somebody outside of it there. But I remember then, I had dinner with her.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I just want to mention, not to get sidetracked, but we have to take real ownership of our own healthcare. We can't just wait for somebody to tell us. Even when we have a good doctor, you got to be aggressive, ask questions, and be proactive. You can't wait thinking that somebody else is going to solve the problem for you or somebody else is going to figure it out. We as individuals have to really own our own healthcare and really be active, engaged participants in our wellness.
And we have a station director here, WHCR, who works very much in that spirit and brings those possibilities to the air.
Yeah, you're talking about Angela Harden, our general manager.
Absolutely.
Very special lady.
Yes, and she brings that kind of understanding to the air. And I can give you again, I like to be personal on the radio if I have an experience. I don't like to bore people too much. I had that experience you just talked about 9 months ago when I had to deal with a serious problem. I was falling a lot. Jenny came with me to my doctor's appointment. My doctor was very good and very responsible and said sensible things. But then Jenny said, let me say something, and told my doctor, David needs such and such and such and such. And the doctor agreed and arranged for such and such, such because Jenny spoke up.
Yeah.
Jenny was thinking of things that I hadn't even thought were possible.
Yeah. That's so important, Dave. I mean, footnote, it's not even a footnote. It's a major aspect of what I was just saying about taking charge of your own healthcare, and that is to have an advocate with you when you visit doctors, hospitals, that's going to be there separate and apart from you, who may be experiencing God knows what with your particular ailment, with your anxiety and your fears about your ailment. To have someone who loves you and cares for you, looking over, asking those hard questions of the doctors, and advocating for your health. That's so important. I know my personal experience, that's been my wife, Linda, has been with me at my side every time I had any health crisis. And if it weren't for her, I probably wouldn't even be here talking about this stuff today. So it's very important to have an advocate that you trust, that loves you, that's with you when you're dealing with your health care.
And Jenny spoke up and got me some care that I hadn't realized I could ask for. Turned out that heavy-duty physical therapy has made a big difference. I'm walking around and not falling like I used to, and that's probably why. And that was because she spoke up, and because I had a responsive doctor who knew what to do and took care of things.
Right.
And that's something everyone deserves. But let me go back to the Iris Davis story, because there was something that came in there that was about how connected. Iris invited me out because I had bumped into a Columbia seminar on how to treat people with AIDS. This was 1985, and they were just starting to get decent treatments. One of them was I said, go there. The key one turned out to be aerosol contaminated. And I just happened to be walking through a Columbia building and saw a sign saying, latest treatments in AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
Walked into that seminar and discovered that Donald Armstrong at Memorial Sloan Kettering had been testing something called aerosol pentamidine, an existing drug that was very rarely used, inhaled. And he said he did 3 trials. And that was what was PCP pneumonia was killing everybody with AIDS then. In the first trial, he had, I'm remembering the numbers vaguely, 40 patients, and only 4 of them died of PCP. He found some better methods, changed the dose a little bit, did a second trial, and it went down, and only 2 patients died of PCP.
Mm-hmm.
You went into Memorial, you bent over, took this inhaler, breathed it as deeply into your lungs as you could get it. And in his third trial, which he was just reporting, and this was the first report anywhere, it wasn't in any medical journal. It was at a Columbia seminar I accidentally wound up in.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't lost anybody yet.
Wow.
That was really dramatic. I was working at BAI at that time. I asked the program director, can I have a few special spots to bring that onto the air? And I had all the tape from Don Armstrong Memorial, and I brought a whole lot of other people with AIDS,
Mm-hmm.
including ultimately Iris Davis. It was clear. I was the first non-medical report anywhere on what was for 6 months the most important drug saving lives with AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best thing I ever did on radio, because that helped people.
Mm-hmm.
So a few months after, I go out to see Iris Davis, and I asked her, you don't seem to be set up with this pentamidine, which, remember, was just experimental at Memorial Sloan Kettering at that point, but the data was so good that other doctors in New York were starting to use it. And I asked her that and the tape on the radio. And then we had dinner afterwards. She said, David, you're right, but I just haven't had time to make it happen. I've seen the data. I want it for my patients, but I haven't been able to get it yet. Broke out crying.
Oh, wow.
Because this was the kind of doctor you want.
Yeah.
Really gives
Somebody
a
who
damn.
cares.
But if people at Memorial, and there was a little mafia, about a dozen doctors who were treating AIDS patients in New York. They all knew each other. They were all referring back and forth. I don't think Armstrong was gay, but most of these doctors were.
Mm-hmm.
Who even died of AIDS a few years later. I didn't even know they were sick.
Mm.
But finding those guys who were all plugged into each other would actually have meetings at places like GMHC to compare notes on what was working and what wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see what was the movie that had Michael McConaughey about making bathtub AIDS medicines?
Don't know that one.
Yeah, it won an Academy Award about 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It was a group of patients who got together to make something called AL-721, a fairly innocuous set of amino acids put together that, in a very small study in Israel, seemed to help some of the 12 patients who got it.
Mm-hmm.
The AIDS people, as you know, because you saw act up in the streets, silence equals death. What they weren't going to let people not know. I made it to some of the act up meetings. In fact, I even did a die-in with them in front of the White House at one point.
Mm-hmm.
They were all knowing, and this was the thing that seemed promising, and because it might be helpful, and there was no way to get it, it wasn't a regular drug. We're literally making it in their bathtubs.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew a medical student in New York who also I brought to the radio. When you do the radio, you can get to meet some really interesting people. Yeah. And I talked with a lot of people, including the medical director of New York City, I forget what his title was, about how do you decide whether to take a chance on this new stuff? And he said, first thing to look, does it do any harm? Hippocrates said, above all, do no harm. And the data on 721 was harmless.
Mm-hmm.
There was no good proof that it worked, and it probably didn't. And Dallas Buyers Club was the name of the movie that they made with
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Because for a group in Dallas who was making the same stuff as some people I knew here in New York were making.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Turned out it didn't work.
Did not work.
Did not work.
Mm-hmm.
But aerosol pentamidine worked. Acyclovir worked very well against the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 2 wonderful years. We had a few new drugs, including the pentamidine. And if you got to a good doctor, you didn't die.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was after a time when everybody was dying and dying.
Yeah. Yeah, those were scary times.
Which is why, now that I have a voice on the radio, I say there's lots of medical progress. Make sure you make the connection to get yourself the right treatment when you need it.
Yeah.
How much time do we have, sir?
Oh, we only got about 5 minutes, really about 4 minutes. And I wanted the latest story. I wanted to talk just for a minute about that mind reading semantic decoder, which is, I think, based on AI technology that enables folks to who can't speak to have their minds read, quote unquote, and the machine, the computer, then spits out text and or language that corresponds to the thoughts. I mean, that's amazing stuff, Dave.
Quite that good. It's not quite there yet, but it clearly works. Mm-hmm. There's several ways. Elon Musk is putting very thin wires into the brain with sensors at the end of it. But the one that just came out is putting a headset on, which essentially does a fancy EEG, and or they now have a small unit that can do magnetic resonance imaging, the really heavy duty stuff that you need, heavy duty hospital equipment usually to do, but now they're coming out with. And you can train people to think of a word and often, not always, but often find the word that they wanted to say, put it on the screen, send it to a speech synthesizer.
Yeah.
It is now clearly possible in the research labs to read people's minds. Getting better and better by the month.
Yeah. You know, I was fascinated, Dave. One of the techniques that I read about was using the sensor that you said that's reading your brain waves. And what they did was they played hours and hours of podcasts for the person to listen to, and then monitored the brain waves. So essentially, the machine is learning what your brain does when you hear certain things, and then it's able to kind of then scan your brain when you're thinking that stuff or related stuff and spit it back out again. Pretty ingenious scheme, I thought.
It is absolutely the same kind of thing that's behind ChatGPT and all the imaging, all the text stuff. It's a kind of neural network that looks at a heck of a lot of data, as you were saying, hours of your brain waves, and finds patterns in them and interprets them.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. It's not in the clinic yet. What I'm giving you is coming out of the research labs. Elon Musk just got permission to try it on 4 patients. Different. He actually used very thin wires going into the brain. But it's very clear from the research that this can work.
Yeah, it may not be perfect, but the trajectory that it's on is stunning. Yeah.
And I think we have to put the rest of that discussion off till next week. Yes, we
do. It's been fascinating. You've been listening to Dave Burstein and Stu Reid as we talk about the latest technology and healthcare and ways that technology and AI are helping to make our lives better. This has been Community and Technology. Dave, you got a final point?
One thing, there's infinite hype out there about what you can do with AI. Some of what you can do with AI is close to miraculous. A lot of it isn't. So if you're looking at this stuff, look hard, find the best researchers, do your homework. Don't just believe some of the quacks who are already writing books with utter nonsense in them.
Okay. Words of wisdom and caution. Thanks, Dave. This has been Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, every Wednesday at 5 to 6 p.m. Tune in. Just might learn something. See you next week.